Bonjour, namaste, shalom. Welcome to our conversation with Mr. D.V.Sridharan, author of the book Good News India, Ordinary Indians, Extraordinary Triumphs. The book is about what he calls people who really mattered to India, away from the gloom and doom of India that the mainstream media often brings us. Born in a conservative middle-class Tamil family, Mr. Sridharan spent his professional life in the Merchant Navy, traveling around the world. In 2000, he started the blog Good News India, which led to this wonderful book. If you haven't read it, I strongly recommend that you buy the book and read it. It's worth every paisa that you will spend on buying it. Mr. Sridharan, thank you for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for featuring me on your very popular program. Thank you.
In terms of format, I will start with some questions. Of course, we'll have plenty of time for questions from our wonderful audience as and when they want to ask questions. But let me start by asking you, what is a 30 to 40 second elevator pitch of your book? How would you describe it to someone who has not read it yet?
I can't do better than the blurb I carried on my website, goodnewsindia.com. That should summarize it. And it says, news of positive action, steely endeavor, and quiet triumphs. News that are little known. And then I tweeted on V.S. Naipaul's rather unfair book on India at that time. He called it India, a Million Mutinies Now. So as a response to him, I also carried on the homepage of my thing, India is a million initiatives now, and Good News India is dedicated to publishing them. So that is about the motive of the book. And I decided to see the better side of India, that is, people don't often see or choose not to see. And that's how Good News India came about. And that would be the approach with which a reader would get into my book, because that's what you will find.
India, a land of million initiatives. And that is what encouraged me, motivated me to share this book with almost everyone in my network, encouraging them to read it. But let me ask you, what motivated you to write this book about extraordinary triumphs of ordinary Indians, as you call it?
Yeah, I got to go back a little bit from before when I got into writing that book. I was in the Merchant Navy. It was, I must say, by the time I trained for the Merchant Navy, and I was a cadet, and I went into training at the age of 17 in Bombay and Calcutta. And we were all required to be brown sahibs, and I rather liked it. Crisp white uniforms, and we had to speak only in English in the corridors, and the mother tongue can be spoken in the cabins. So we all grew to be anglicized people. The alienation began. I'm a Tamil by birth, and slowly there was little opportunity to speak in Tamil. And we had to eat with knives and forks and have the officer-like qualities. I must say, I'm mocking it a little bit now, but I rather enjoyed it. And so I began to, English was not my natural language. I didn't read a book in English until the age of 15. But that left always a lack in me, so I made up for it. And slowly I began to think, and I went out to sea, and life was beautiful. And so there was no reason for me to rethink about the unfairness to India, because I was living in a wonderful world. But still, the India in me never left me, obviously, because I never could take an insult to India when I was traveling. If people pleased it, it pleased me some more. I mean, if the people praised it, it pleased me a lot. But if someone were to say something nasty, I found the Indianness in me coming up, and I said, why the hell? So at that time, India was really in a bad shape. You know, our economy was bad, what they used to call the Hindu rate of growth, rather disparagingly. The person who called it as a Hindu, although he had no role, he said that. And then we had food shortages, we had famines, We had poor economy, unemployment, and corruption, and electoral malfeasance. All that was going on. And so there was much to be unhappy about. And yet, when others called the spade, I didn't quite enjoy it. And I do remember one particular book that annoyed me the most. It appeared in 1965. It was called Famine 1975. And that was predicting a future a decade ahead. And it said there's going to be such an irreversible famine in 1975 that countries' economy is going to wobble, and starvation deaths are going to be rampant. And so the powerful nations of the world, that is Australia, the grain-producing countries, that England, America, Australia, New Zealand, I think it was Brazil as well, and Argentina, these must ration out the food to countries that have a chance of recovering. So they divided the rest of the countries, other than the food surplus countries, into three grades. India was put into the last one and saying it has no hope. India must be allowed to perish and die. And you can look up that book, Famine 75. It was written by two brothers, Paddock. I don't know the first names, Paddock 1, Paddock 2. So this was what predicted, and that riled me, that annoyed me, that announced me so much. And we are not going to die because somebody wants us to, with things that will disappear. Well, I don't know what happened to the Paddock brothers. I'm still here to tell the tale. And India has come many, many miles in the right road. So that bothered me. And then I slowly tried to retrace my Indianness, and yet I was still sailing at sea. And I had a job to keep later on when I came to thing. But it was certain I had quite alienated from the real side of India. I had seen more of the world than I had seen of India. And so it is one thing to have love in your heart, but you must have a basis to back it. So I didn't quite have it. That was to happen some years later, when for some reasons I had to leave the city and went to live by myself by about 25 kilometers outside Chennai, which is where I'm talking to you from. I started planting trees. And I looked at people around me, not the kind of people I met when I was at sea, nor when I was in business in the city. People, ordinary, humble people, and I saw the way they went about. And then another book leapt out of the shelves and came into my hands called River Sutra. That's by Geeta Mehta, Mr. Naveen Patnaik's sister. And that book was about Narmada. And as soon as I write the book, this actually happened. I'm not exaggerating. I read the last page of the book and I went straight to the railway station to book myself a ticket to go to the Narmada. I did that. And that extended trip to Narmada and Kashi and also Delhi, that really brought me back and made me think of seeing more and more of it. And then I said, when I'm seeing more and more of it, why don't I start writing about it? So that's how I set up Good News India and jumped into a car. And that's another story I'll tell you when you ask me. I don't want to prejudge your questions. Yeah.
And the story about Narmada, you do recount in the book, correct?
Yes.
So, your answer has so many different aspects to it. For example, the idea that you can take an Indian out of India, but you can never take the Indianness out of an Indian.
But quite a few succeed in losing India.
That is true. And the other thing about how you'd spend so much of your life outside India that you knew more about the outside than you knew about India. That reminds me of another famous Indian, Mahatma Gandhi ji, who when he came back to India and he was asked to lead the freedom struggle, he said, but I don't know anything about India. I've been living outside India for all my life. And so started the journey of trying to learn about India before he made his, the rest is history. So your answer sort of touches on so many different aspects. And I did write down the name of the book, Famine 75, and I'm going to get it and read it. As you rightly pointed out, the news about the death of India has been vastly exaggerated from the beginning of this country. So,
and it'll always be wrong.
Yeah. But let me move to the next question, which is, what are 4 to 5 things about this book that you would want people to learn or take away?
It's all about positive news, and it's all authentic, I can tell you. At least the books that have been, or articles that have been collected in this anthology, there are about 25 of them, were all consequent of a personal interview, my having driven to that place. So the stories are authentic, they're true, but we must be cautious about consuming good stories, you know. That's something that occurred to me some years later. We can be lulled into thinking that everything is good. This book might make you feel over good. So that's one precaution, I would say, that we must bear in mind going through this book. The second thing is, that's the reason, because a good deed is required as a response to a bad scene. You see, if there was no bad scene, there was no opportunity for a good work. In a perfect world, there's nothing like good work. So obviously, quite a few things were wrong. But my point was, yes, things go wrong all the time, from Mahabharata time to now. But if people attend to it, well, that society survives. And I said, India had the people who rose to the occasion and rose to the problem and met the challenges. And so that is the second thing. And then I made another point that you got to. The thing is, a good story is lovely to read. But the purpose of a good story, I feel, is to inspire you to some good work. And I can't see what 20 good stories don't do that 150 can, I say. I think somewhere along the line, I was hoping that my stories would spark an interest in other people, and they get down. And there was evidence people were doing it. I used to get a lot of fan mail at the time. And people would say, because of this, I am doing this. And they reached out in many, many small ways. That is another objective. So with these three in mind, I would welcome readers into my book. But these are cautionary tales that I would put there. So don't get lulled and get on to finding your own good work. And then remember, the good is a consequence of a bad scene. So if there's a lot of good work happening in the country that has become remarkable, there's a lot of ills in that country.
Well, is there any family or any country in the world that doesn't have problems, right? I mean, so I
India
think
in particular, that becomes, we are a big country. We are a big country. We are not like Sweden or Holland, you know. A government can run the whole country out of a laptop, you know. I mean, we are a very big country. So personal initiatives are required. They will always be required.
right.
And we have found the people to do it.
And let me now take you back to sort of your childhood. I know in the book you write that you were born in a conservative Tamil family, but tell us a little bit about the environment in your family. What kind of environment was it? Was it an environment that encouraged writing, reading, studying? Tell us a little bit.
Now, looking back, we are a very modest family. My father was beginning his career as a banker, and it took him another 40, 45 years to rise to some eminence, which he did eventually. But he was on a small salary. He was an accountant in a bank at the time, and he had to raise 4 children. It was hard. We sat on the floor and we ate frugally, and we walked everywhere. I was a barefoot boy till the age of 12, and I was born 5 years before India became free. Let's get a measure of that. So I was barefoot everywhere. Everybody was barefoot. It was sort of though I could afford, well, we couldn't have afforded 4 pairs of slippers every second year or so, but we could have afforded 1. But then we chose to go by. I grew up in Bangalore till the age of 15. I walked everywhere barefoot. So we sat on the floor, and we were a Tamil-speaking family. There was no opportunity to know English. There were just 4 books in the house. My father had those 4 books, and they just kept in the top shelves. And we read the Tamil weekly magazines and things like that. I went to a Tamil medium school. I didn't know the English alphabet until the age of 12. And then my father said, no, that's enough Tamil. You learn Tamil, now you learn English. And he threw me into the high school with barely any confidence about English. So that gave me a huge complex that I couldn't speak English. I used to be frightened of people speaking English in my presence, and I used to sneak away because just in case they spoke in English to me, I would be terrified to answer. I wouldn't know how to answer. So I backed off from it, and then English became a challenge. I said, this is something that must be mastered. It seems to be the key to the success of the world. And I don't mind telling you, when I was young, if somebody spoke in English, he was taken to be an intelligent man. And if he can claim that he has read as much as 1 book, he's likely to be nominated as an intellectual. So my first 2 goals were to speak in English so that I'm called intelligent. The second is to read a book. And I read my first English book at the age of 15.
And how does that get to the Merchant Navy then? You joined the Merchant Navy when you were in 19?
No, I was 15. And then I had an uncle at sea. He had gone to the Merchant Navy. He was the talk of the town. He was the talk of the entire thing. He was a very handsome man. He used to come on holidays once in a year and a half. He had a little beard, and he had a crisp uniform, and he was a very charming, very kind man. He was a lovely uncle to me. And I saw him, and quite frankly, I wanted to go to sea because I thought I'll be allowed to grow a beard, you see. So I got stuck on that idea from the age of 14. And then I had no interest in other subjects. I learned physics. I mean, I was fond of, I enjoyed my curriculum, but I wanted to go to sea and see the world like my uncle's stories passed on to me. So I did join up at the age of 16. I appeared at the age of 16 and 16 and a half or so. So I went to Bombay, which seemed like another country coming from Chennai, Madras at the time.
Yeah, and you do recount that story in the book also. So I encourage people to sort of, make sure they read the book to learn about how at the time Mumbai or Bombay seemed like a Western country to you. But let me move to the next question. When you told people you were going to write this book, which highlights Indians doing positive things, or when you told them you were going to start the website Good News India, what reactions did you get from folks around you?
As a matter of fact, there was no book to write, and I had never told anybody that I would write a book. The book came about due to by some other route, which I'll explain to you later. I had never been a writer, but over the years, having soaked in English literature with a vengeance for having missed it in my childhood, having read almost exclusively in English, I began to love that language. I began to enjoy good writing. And my heroes were Evelyn Waugh and Graham Greene and Irish Murdoch, the early Irish Murdoch, and E.M. Foster, Galsworthy, people like that. And they used to, and then the poets. Somehow I developed a fancy for the English poets. Robert Graves and was my favorite, and W.H. Auden, both as prose and poetry. I'm very fond of. So I could speak well and I could communicate well, but I had never written. And I had a certain vanity. I would not submit my writing for someone to evaluate it. And I said, if I'm good enough to write, it should pass. So why should I? I never tried sending any of my writing to an editor. So my writing never found a scope. But when I had this urge to go and reacted sharply to India being bad-mouthed and wanting to go and discover myself, if it's as horrible as these fellows are making out. I had a hunch it was not. Otherwise, we would have come along these 5,000 years and survived. But I wanted to prove to myself. And then the more I began to get into it, and I said, why not write about these things? So I started keeping a journal as I went about. And then I found that, if I may say so myself, it sounded good to me on second reading. So I approved it for publication, and I said, if I'm not going to send it to an editor, what else would I do? And that's when the internet came along. And I must claim this for me. If there are other people who can make a similar claim, I leave it to them. But I think I'm the first person in this world who declared internet as a revolution, if you know what I mean. I knew at once it's a paradigm shift. It was going to change everything. And I remember going to internet parlor, paying 250 rupees per hour and being admitted to the space. And I could hypertext freaked me out, the magic that it could track and that it could link from one to the other. So I taught myself how to create a website. The word blog was not invented. The word Google was not known. Or Google might have just come in. It was that early in the internet. So I had to set up the site myself. So I think I'm going past your question. So I never got my thing published. And as and when I traveled, and the experience was so new, and I kept sort of a journal when I was at sea, not very regular. So that was all the writing that I did. But this was set up the Good News India and started posting. I must admit it became quite an instant success. My sign-ups for the newsletter grew to be 6,000 in no time at all, no advertisement in the early days. So
then why did you stop it? Why did you stop Good News India?
For the same reason that I went in. And how many good stories must I read and experience before I look to doing something good? You know, if you consume a lot of food without exercising, you're going to get nowhere. So I said, you got to put it to some use. You can't get up in the morning and read 10 good stories, you know, and then go on saying the world is good. There are people who do that. I see them all the time. They feel blissfully good. There might be inheritors of great fortunes and people like that. But it must lead to some good. So I asked myself, what's my good news? I'm not going to spend a lifetime as a reporter of good news. And that's when by that time, if I'm not going ahead of your questioning, the kind of stories I wanted to do in the second half of the 6 and 8 years that I published, but distinctly look, I was not aware of it then. I'm now aware. The first half was one set of stories, any kind of good work, and I would say it was most of the stories were like of the firefighting kind. There's a problem, like the children's home or our old age home. The end is never, unless everyone ends up owning the parents. It's not likely. So that'll be you're fighting a fire all the time. But there are other things that are lasting solutions. They are end solutions. And almost all of them had to do with nature and environmental restoration, rainwater harvesting, afforestation, and regeneration of rural livelihoods. This is the sort of stories that I enjoyed doing. And then I realized that was the message for me. And if you read my anthology of the 25 stories, I handpicked out of 100 stories. My favorites are there. Almost about 50% of them is about people who went back to the land and did something by it. I think if you do that, you can forget about the rest. You know, if you can look after your quarter acre, I think the world will be a different place. So I said that, let me go and give my hand. By the time I had met a lot of people who had transformed land, transformed communities, transformed livelihoods. And in fact, I would like to cite Staring the Drought in the Eye. That's one of the stories that I read. A whole village used to, it's in the book. staring the drought in the eye. It's about a village that used to be deserted of its men, except for 2 months of the year. They would all go to a mine and sleep 6 to a room and work there to earn money to come back and support the families. The village had no men to do the funeral rites of the dead people. The women were running it. And yet they had a lot of land they couldn't cultivate. And that was transformed by a team of 2 people who put them through rainwater harvesting, farm ponds, and now all this is Hubli, Davangere, Dharwad, that kind of a place. They used to go to Hospet to work at the steel. I'd driven through that place in a car. Terrible. Your car goes through and you get the patina of the iron ore dust. So these people, nobody goes there. They all live in the village. And when I went and interviewed them, they said, we have a different kind of a problem now. Our people in the village are not enough. We are going to employ labor from other villages now. So this is a kind of a beautiful story. So when I saw all that, so I said, let me do something by way of harvesting water and planting trees. That's how I came about it. Yeah.
Sridharanji, I have many questions still, but I think Sahana Singh has a very interesting question. Sahanaji, would you like to ask your question on camera?
Yes, sure. I'll be happy to do that. You can hear me, I guess.
I can.
Yeah, I'm just loving the sight of DV wearing a collared shirt because he always wears those boat neck shirts because he's a sailor. So today he has really dressed up for this. And it's just very inspiring to listen to you. But I wanted to know if you were ever a part of the story that you were investigating, like, you guided the individuals or mentored them to achieve what they are doing. I mean, like you met you saw an evolving story and you helped them along to achieve what they did. Can you recall anything like that?
No, I'm afraid not. I was a student. I was observing and I was making notes and I had to learn. And then I was not even aware that I was going to become what I call, I don't want to use the word environmentalist, that I would get into restoring a patch of land. But it had crawled on me twice. I didn't think that, I began to learn, get the knowledge, but I was not quite confident to. Now a lot of people approach me and ask me, and your article after your visit with your family to my place really put me up there, the showcase. And quite a few people come. And when I distinctly remember when I talked about swale. Oh, swale, I know. I've seen them in Texas, you said.
Oh, that's amazing.
And the swale is what changed me. So now it's become far from advising and counseling people. I gone to the other end. No one leaves my farm without a lecture on water harvesting. Now, everyone who comes is mandatorily has to listen to me. And I just love talking about saving water. And if I'm, with the permission of the host, I would say my favorite poet, W.H. Auden, once said, thousands of men have lived without love, but not one without water, he said. So that's about where water is. I think love is an overrated thing, but water comes ahead. So,
So I have another question about engineering, because I see that you are such a natural engineer. You solve problems, you look at it, you customize equipment and machinery to achieve the results that you want. Do you see this in the new generation? Like, I know you write good stories, but tell us honestly about what you think about the engineering graduates that you are meeting and what they should be improving.
Yeah, I was lucky because as a marine engineer, we're all hands-on engineers. We had to do things. I loved it. I hated classrooms, but I loved workshops. So I could go and work with my hands. So that time, I don't know if you recall when you visited me, I have a little workshop there. And when I first went there was no electricity. So I lived with 2 small solar panels. But now I have electricity. I have all the power tools. I have woodworking machines. I have a little welding machine. So we do a lot of things ourselves. But not everyone is a natural handyman. But what I found happens is when people go on the land and start caring for it, they become handymen. So they have to fix few things. They're going to fix a pump. They're going to learn about a pump and how to fix a leaky pipe. They got to learn the basic things. So most people who, even if they had studied philosophy and they were to get into redevelopment of a land, in about 2-3 years, you will find that they're pretty good handymen. This is another thing. It'll keep you busy. A farm will keep you busy. And but it's fun busy. So that is there.
Thank you.
Sridharanji, I will draw you back to the book. And in the book, you write about the Manganyas. Could you tell the audience a little bit about them?
See, Manganyas I came to through Mr. Komal Katari. Komal Katari is too little celebrated a man. So he brought the folk culture and made a database of it. Among that was the music of the Manganyas, the music of the desert. And Manganyas are part of Upper Rajasthan and Sindh. You know, these people did they're all Muslims, unconscious Muslims, actually. They had names like Shankar Khan and Krishna Khan, and they sang in praise of the Indian Hindu deities. And they earned their livelihood. They would compose poems after a story. The livelihood came from praising the family that patronized them. So on occasions like marriage and birthdays and important days, they would be called and they would be standing there and entertain all the guests, who would be the guests of the host, who's the important man. And I'm sure they exaggerated the praise of their ancestors, and they used to praise and they used to be handsomely rewarded. So the music stopped there, that culture stopped there. It didn't go very far. And we owe it to Mr. Rajiv Gandhi when he became the Prime Minister. He started the Festival of India. He staged it all over the world. And then it occurred to people, why not put Manganyas in the world audience, in front of the world audience? And they were instant hits. I don't know. Some of your readers and some of the listeners here might have seen the Manganyas performing. Yeah. And there used to be a little guy in that with they all had this oversized turbans, and they used to sing. And there was Kamaicha was one instrument and Sarangi was the other, the two, both string instruments. And this is not just a concert, it's a theater. So actually, he had a very interesting story. Komal Katari had a very interesting story. When he wanted to record all their voices, he found 3 Manganyas walking down the street, and he called them to the house, and they followed him. And he said, please wait here, I want to record you. And he went inside to get his Grundig tape-to-tape recorder. And by the time he came to the foyer, on the veranda, they had gone, they left. So he looked out and they were running. So he chased them and stopped them. And they said why they were running. So they said, we just decided that you're planning to rob our voice and record it. Once we recorded it, we'll lose our voice, and we can't, we won't be able to learn our livelihood. So that's how simple and beautiful they were. So it took about 6 months to persuade them that you would do a small 1-minute recording and play it back to them and ask them to try the vocal cords. They could sing. So it slowly built their confidence. And so I love doing that story.
And you do mention that episode in the book where, you know, he tried to record them and they ran away saying, they think But let me ask you this. In the book, you have a foreword by Mr. Anantha Nageswaran, who writes that, and I quote, most of the Indian elites routinely engage in self-flagellation, end of quote. Could you elaborate on this for our audience? What does he mean by that, you think?
You see, this is called the, I think, who called them the name? I think Naipaul called them after he became an India lover, from an India critic. He called them the weak stomach school, you see. I mean, there's a certain lot of people who will see only the bad in the country. You can present the best to them, they'll decry it, and they will say everything is perfect out of the West and everything is wrong in this kind of this world. So there's no cure for these fellows. And I think that's the person Anantha Nageswaran referred to. By the way, Anantanageswaran is one of the earliest, that's how I became friends with him and his wife Ramya. They were the earliest fans of my Good News India. Almost from the second story, they had been reading my stories, that they would always respond to me and write to them. So when people want to look only the bad, I think you should encourage them to continue. Let them self-flagellate. We can have fewer of them in this country than there are. And so this is the one that he meant. So there are people given to see the right things with the life, and there are chaps who don't want to see even the good. What do you do about it?
Sridharanji, you know, one of the joys of me doing these interviews for me is meeting people like Sahana Singh and you, who are bringing out the positive things from our history and our culture and our society. And I am enjoying learning them because there's not many people who are doing that. So that's why when I read Ananta Nageswaran's, you know, most of the Indian elites routinely engage in self-flagellation, it resonated very, very well with me. I see that even in, you know, I'm a professor. I see that among the intellectuals a lot. And so, yeah. But let's move to the next story. The story you write about the Jaipur Fort, a lot of people have heard about the Jaipur Fort, but your subtitle of the story is The Real Story of the Jaipur Fort. So can you share with our audience about Pandit Ramchandra Sharma and the Mehtas?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, if you had not asked me, I was going to speak about it. Nevertheless, but thank you for asking. You see, it's strange. This story contains many aspects of what goes on in this country. Jaipur Fort was imagined by an orthopedic surgeon. He had seen prosthesis when he had traveled abroad for limbless people. Western solutions, highly mechanical. You must have seen the metallic things that can do articulate movement and things like that. So he wanted to do that in the Savai Mansingh Hospital in Jaipur. There was an artisan, Pandit Ramchandra Sharma. So he said that we'll develop an Indian one. This imported ones do not serve an Indian farmer. Most of the people who lose their limbs are farmers. They put their hands on a saw, or they get run over by something. So they lose the limbs and arms and various things. So he developed a thing out of wood, pretty heavy wood, and it worked. And his prosthesis was the one that enabled the Indian farmer to bicycle, work in the field, and walk, and without crutches. But the thing is, what happened was the sad thing. Mr. P.J. Sethi was the person who was the orthopedic surgeon. So he publicized it, and the world became aware India had the Jaipur Fort. But the Ramon Magsaysay Award was given to him, and I thought there was a great unfairness. He should have mentioned Sharmaji with him. He was the inventor. That didn't happen. Barely about 20 or 30 processes were fitted, the wooden thing. And then he left. And there the thing stood. And I met Sharmaji, such a self-effacing man. I think he passed away recently. I'm not so sure. I hope it's not correct. He was a humble man who never complained. He says, yeah, I would have liked being mentioned, but then he made the world aware of our Indian invention. And then he went on to make it out of rubber. And then when I was there, he was experimenting with PVC tubes that is used in agriculture, big ones.
Wow.
And he learned the art of shaping it in the form of a limb. And he was trying to make it lighter and lighter and lighter. And the Jaipur Fort became worldwide favorite, and it became an Indian iconic invention because of the two brothers, Mehtas. I write about them there. One was in the government service, one of the eminent civil servants, Mr. I forget his first name, Mehta, who was chairman of the SEBI eventually. And he's the person who scaled it up, gave the center stage to Sharmaji, put him in a place of honor, and he did something extraordinary. This must be given with dignity, not as charity, you know. So as soon as people come from the rural parts with a broken leg, lost leg, They are first shown a bathroom to have a wash, given a bed to rest, and first given food, and they're given a bed and not bed, they're given a place to stay with a family, or one or two with them, until the processes is fitted and sent home, and they were given bus fare back. So this is a human touch with which he delivered that work. So that's a few years later, I got a mail from a lady in England, and she says she's coming to India to do a documentary on the Jaipur food. Would I be available for consultation? So she came and met me in Madras, and she asked me about it all, and then she went. I don't know what became of it. I lost track. So it attracted worldwide attention. So that's one of the...
And what stayed with me after I read the story is sort of this phrase that you just used, dignity, not charity. No. That it was not something charitable, although it was helping sort of, people who'd been deprived of a limb, but it was not it was not charity, it was giving them dignity. Is that sort of why the story appealed to you?
Yeah, I mean, that's very important in philanthropy. I mean, if you intrude yourself as a donor and make a scene of your donating, it annoys me. I mean, it's indignity. There's another story on Goonj. I write about Goonj there. It's about a couple in this Anshu and his wife Meenakshi. They recycle clothes and give it to the poor. And he has one thing, I mean, I'll just make this very brief. I don't want to run away with the things that... So he says, don't give a torn piece of garment. Give a garment that you're tired of. Give a garment that you're outgrown. Give a garment you want to give. Don't give a dirty, torn garment. So he gets them, he washes them, and he charges money when he gives it to the poor. And he charges 1 rupee for a shirt or 10 rupees for a sari. The poor is made to give that money. So you took it not free, you paid for it. You paid that rupee, you paid 10 rupees. And these are the little touches that appeal to me. So we just can't be pompously be photographed giving things which you see politicians doing all the time.
And when I read the story about Goonj in the book, I thought, every upper middle class neighborhood in India has so many clothes in the house that they can collect and give, and sort of, this is an initiative that can easily be scaled up in India.
Scaled up. He got the Ramon Magsaysay Award. I don't have great admiration for that award. I know where that award comes from, but this guy, the Goonj team, deserved 3 Magsaysay.
Let me ask you about the next thing. Now, you had been doing these stories, but putting them into the form of a book, how long did it take you to write the book? How did you keep yourself on track and motivated? For the benefit of our audience, I suspect that you didn't make much money out of the book. So how do you keep yourself motivated?
No, I think I didn't start saying I'll write a book. The book was written over 6 years as I traveled the country doing the various stories. And there it lay in my website. I had written about, say, 3 lakh words. I mean, definitely 250,000 words over a period of time. Plus the minor stories, if you add to them, it added to some more considerable amount of writing. I'm a fastidious writer. I go over my writing over and over again, getting the phrasing right and things like that. So it had practically, the second version and the final version was already sitting there. I had no idea about publishing it. I'd gone out of it. And then there's a thing called Indic Academy. I don't know if you heard of it. It was started by a man called Harikiran Badlamani. And there was a young lady there who was in charge of Indica Press, or Indic publishing Indic books. Her name is Dimple Kaur. And she kept telling me, DVG, you must write a book. You must write a book. I said, I have written all that I want to in my life. I'm not writing any book. So she was after me, very affectionate, persuasive kind of a way. But finally, I told her, now listen, all my writing is there. If some publisher wants to put it together, and publish it, I'll be quite happy about it. So that's how the book idea was born. And she quite quickly took it to Bloomsbury. And Bloomsbury, they said they would like to publish it. But I wrote the long prologue and the epilogue for this book. And I would like the readers or who is watching, that's one thing that I wrote. And I would like the people to focus on that because it tells how I came to it and how I left it. And one of the most important one of the most important pieces that I wrote in the closing of the book, in the epilogue, I written something called Vitasta Fall. It's about a denudation of the Amarkantak Hill where Narmada is born, what it was and what industrialization has done to it, mining. I read that. Before I began Good News India, I chose not to read it. I chose not to see the negative, what I thought negative. By the time of 6 to 8 years of running Good News India, that story came back to me and says, now what do you have to say? That article asked me, now do you believe? I would like you to read that, and I would like everybody to read that piece, Vitasta Fall. It's about how Narmada's ecosystem, the Amarkantak, where Narmada is born, how it was transformed and destroyed because of mining. It still goes on, I think. It's terrible. So I am in a dilemma now about the so-called progress and Vikas and the environment on the other side. I think we don't have the balance. I think the balance must be restored.
Yeah, and I think a lot of developing countries are facing this challenge of how to develop but still maintain the environmental sort of heritage and the good environment. The forest, the land resources, the water resources, and sort of do sustainable development. So yeah.
But I know. Let me take this opportunity to say something that I say whenever I can. The environment must be saved from the environmentalists.
Could you elaborate?
I want to repeat. The environment must be saved from the environmentalists. These people are, I think these people fly around and make these big speeches and they talk about throwing, and they don't know what the Western countries are doing to the non-Western countries. You see, the footprint of an Indian is very small. The environmental footprint of an Indian is very small. Majority of us are living in very humble, frugal lives. Not because they chose to. They probably want to be sitting in air-conditioned rooms and drive around in cars. But luckily, we are not there yet. Eventually, it'll happen. But this environmentalism, that they can't go without a day of electricity. And they would still fight about the nuclear power stations. And sorry for taking your time, but do give me 2 minutes because I have this opportunity. There's a man called James Lovelock. I think he's about 89 or 90, I don't know. He's a professor in Edinburgh, he's a scientist. He was when I was a young man, was inspired by the environment and things like that. So he was an icon for us. And he wrote about the coming global warming. And he said, we've got to have a terminable contract with nuclear power. Because a nuclear power has got the best safety record, not the best safety record, it's got a good safety record, and it doesn't add to the global warming. The alternate energy technologies are still young. They will take some time to mature, and give them some time. And Lovelock instantly developed the concept of Gaia, Earth as a living organism, that it will heal itself. In this book, he says, Gaia has terminal fever. So we must go to there. The day he said it, he was an icon for a lifetime. He is environmentalist, none can be better than him. The so-called environmentalists damned him because they got the bug about nuclear power. They won't rethink it, they won't reevaluate it. They do not realize solar panels and windmills require extremely high technology. You can't do without technology. So that's why I say the environment must be saved from the environmentalists. They walk around very preachy, and I've been blackmarked by them, so that's all right. I'll hold my own.
Let me ask the audience if they have any questions at this point before we move into the final stretch of the interview. If you have any questions, please this would be a good time to ask. Okay. If we have anyone else, I will invite them. But in the meantime, let me move to the next question. You mentioned a lot of authors you read. You also mentioned how, as a young marine engineer, you were, in your words, brown sahib, brown in color and English in, behavior and thinking. And all the authors you mentioned were English. So have there been any Indian authors who've inspired you?
The Indian writing scene, when in the 1960s, was very thin. I mean, there was not too many. I remember a man called Shakti Brata, I think. He was one chap who got published in the West, and he wrote the Confessions of an Indian Woman Eater. He wrote a book, I remember. And he was talked about, and I used to hear about him in London. There was Raja Rao writing in Hindi, and there was the one credible person who was really renowned was R.K. Narayan, whom Graham Greene endorsed for a Nobel Prize, and he did come about. But the Indians writing in English, there were not too many when I was young. So I almost entirely read the English writers. And I love the language, English, I love the language, but it alienated me. That's another thing. I'm coming back to my Tamil. Tamil comes back to me. But my natural language has become English. But I do like the English authors of the time, the classical authors, Dickens, and much later, Graham Greene and other people, and the poets. So there were not too many. But now, in the last 10 years, and someone would read a political intent in mentioning my 10 years, thinking that I'm talking about a particular regime having come. It's not so. But in the last 10 years, there's been a blossoming of Indians writing in English. And there are some brilliant people writing in English. And Sanjeev Sanyal, his style is really excellent. And you should read, he has written on the Indian Ocean. And I don't really know the title of the book. So now there are so many stars. Now publishers, the international publishers are camping in India looking for Indian authors. Now Sai Deepak is iconic. And the thing is, most of the writing in the Indians, if I may say so, is based on our itihasas, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Vishnu Purana, and things like that, made popular by Amish Tripathi to begin with. And it has fed a lot of people. There's also Devdutt Patnaik, who earns a good living, making it a nasty business of it. Quite a despicable writer, if I may say so. I would like to say it publicly. There are many young authors who have been inspired by Mahabharata, and I have into it, ball by ball. Of course, I know my Mahabharata. There are many young people who have digested the Mahabharata and write about it. Sai Swarupa Iyer, she's a brilliant writer. And the thing is, that is being overdone now. I think the Itihasa-based writing is crowded. But now you're getting historians. Now, Vikram Sampath. And
so you keep up with all this writing?
No, unfortunately, my eyes don't. I would like to. I've been around for 81 years now, and my eyes have been belabored by me to work hard. So now they're rebelling. So I almost entirely read in Kindle, not the print. Print, if I'm having a sleepless night, I start reading a printed one, I sleep quite quickly, my eyes tire. But so this makes the pleasure of reading rather slow. So I would like to read, and I read compulsorily, but mostly on Kindle, and that takes time. And I also am busy with my project. But I do survey the land, and I keep in touch with the new writers. Lots of people are aspiring to write, and they're finding publishers. And Sahana Singh, who came along, she has written that iconic book, and that see, the things I like about the book, that there's a certain commonality between what Sai Deepak has written in one realm and what Sahana has written in the other. In the other is this. In both their books, they write about the people away from the central scene. In Sahana's book, you'll see students and teachers walking between gurukulas, coming from overseas. There's a lot of movement of people. And that's what fascinates me. India is a much lived in, much traversed, and much enjoyed place. And these books give that flavor. And Sai Deepak's book too, is the second book that is written. He talks about what goes on the ground. We lack social history in India. We have political history. We have the history of our ancestry, but we don't have social history. And that's a lack I hope somebody would fill.
And especially social history that is not self-flagellation.
Yeah. No, how, see, when all these big things happen, people were living in this country doing these various things. When invasion happened, it was not all over. It was in one pocket. People were going on. If I had the time, I would tell you the other story, but I'll keep it for some other time. I'll let you lead the...
What books are you reading these days?
I'm now reading, making a slow progress of Sai Deepak's second book. I read the first book and I wrote a review of that. I'm reading the second one. Next in line is Mr. Gautam Desiraju, who you featured. And I want to read him. And I read simultaneously 2 or 3 books. I'm reading Vikram Sampath and Veer Savarkar.
Yeah, a lot of people have now praised the Veer Savarkar book to me, so I'm going to buy that too and read it.
Yeah,
thank you for mentioning it.
You can evaluate. You don't have to come to the conclusion Vikram Sampath comes to, but you must know the details of the man. You can't brush him black and dismiss him. So he had a role to play. So, but there are many other people. There's a young author who is not, she labors really hard and she is very dedicated to her writing. Manoshi Sinha, Saffron Swords, and she's publishing a second volume. So these people are all self-kindled people. I mean, they think that they must do the right thing by the country, and they're right. So,
yeah, I'm trying to get Manoshi Sinha to come on this interview series also, because I've heard a lot of good things about her book.
And Saishwar Iyer is another person.
Wonderful. So given that we are sort of at the end of our time, my last question to you, what is the next book you're working on? I know you said 81, and I know you said the eyes are tired, but it is clear that the mind and the heart is still not tired. So what's the next book?
No, I'm toying with the idea if there would be people who are interested in knowing what happened in 81 years of this man's life. You know, I was born 5 years before independence India, and I have memories of various stages throughout my life. And I was wondering whether I should put together and write about my seagoing life and my adventures in Good News India. Well, I'm not saying that I'm writing that book. That book idea occurs to me, and I thought that a private person looking at a public scene, I've always been politically aware, politically interested, and I had opinions. And if you follow politics, you've got to have opinions. So opinions is what make your story. So I have a lot of opinions. So I was wondering if there would be an audience for it. 1 or 2 people I pitched it to thought there would be. But then I must get down to it. My preoccupation is now to make sure that my environmental work finds a credible successor and keeps going. There's an attachment which I should not have, but I do. So once I put it away, and I suppose I would live to be another 20, 25 years, then I could write the second book.
And for whatever it is worth, I think the Merchant Navy journey is interesting. I think the Good News India journey is interesting. But I also think that the journey of your own environmental project and how you just didn't report, you also actually did. I think that is also interesting. So maybe a biography that includes all of that. I think
I'm a political animal. I think I am into politics and I have my opinions. And I had them from the beginning, even when I was young. And I have been interested in history. So I could, I don't have to make money out of it, but I think you must make a book that is people who want to read it. So let's see. I don't want to say that I'm writing a book and people asking me when is it going to be published. I just leave it open. So at the age of 81, you tend to look at things slightly differently.
So Sridharanji, let me take this opportunity to thank you very much for joining us today for this interview. I wish you personally, I wish you the best of luck for your next project. And I truly look forward to one day learning more about your environmental farm. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having. I hope you learned the lesson from having interviewed me. Don't get an old man as a person to interview. He won't stop talking.
I enjoyed every minute of it.
Thank you. Thank you for indulging me. And I'm glad I got to talk to you and to other people who are here. Thank you very much.
Have a good rest of the evening. Bye-bye.